So back in our code here, we see that this is working perfectly fine. We can see that tap 9 or tap button is incrementing because we are recomposing and all the great things are happening. Now remember that you have, no pun intended, you have to pass the remember here, because the remember keyword can store a mutable or immutable object. So if values change, right, in this state here, it will trigger recomposition, which is the refresh of the UI, but not just the whole UI, but more specifically in this case, it's going to be targeted to this text here. Okay, this is what is changing, right? We're changing the user interface in this case by passing in our money counter data. Okay, so got it. We have to have a remember and then inside a multiple state of to create the actual state, and a remember will remember that state. Okay, now this is one way of actually creating a remember here, right? The other way is as follow. I can say var money c just to differentiate, and I'm just going to go ahead and say is equal to remember like this, and then just pick the second one, and then we can pass our mutable state of, and pass in this case 0. Now if I change the whole thing, let's just use that one. Let's comment out this money counter there. You will see that we have a problem. The reason why is because the way we have created this variable here, money counter, now we're not using delegate by here. It works, but we have to change a few things, because now this money counter is not going to work, because it's going to say if you have an over, it's money counter, it's just a mutable state. It's not just an integer, but it's a mutable state. So we wrapped that into a mutable state. So what is a mutable state? Well, so a mutable state allows us to hold the state, right? It's just a wrapper that holds a state, but most importantly, these values are going to be able to send information, to send events. In this case, the compose function will observe this value. So all we have to do now is say dot and get the value. So it's a little bit more work, a little bit of code, but we're just going to say get the value of that mutable state. Okay, and here too we're going to have to say dot value like this, and if we run this we should see the same thing, but we've just changed the way we are creating these variables. Okay, now you can see everything still works the same, which is great. Now although everything works fine, we can tap and we can see the numbers going up. That's fine, but the whole idea really is to make sure that we update this 100 here, right? We have a counter here that we want, or text in this case, that it must update as we tap. And if you see, all this clicking is happening inside of create circle composable. So how do we then call that somewhere where we can then, in this case, be able to attach to this text here, right? Meaning this money counter here, we want to attach to this text. So essentially do exactly what we did here, right? This was just testing. We want to attach money counter to this text, and so we can see then money going up. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that we'll have then to remove this state here outside of our create circle. This is another concept called state hoisting, which means we are hoisting it. We are taking it up a level from where we are this state. So I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to call inside of my app like this. Okay, so we have a money counter, and there it is. But then of course this is not going to work here in our clickable because we have lost that. How do we then make it so that we're able to still interact, of course, with our clickable, right? Make sure that then this counter is still valid, meaning that we can still click and change this value here, because now we have this huge disconnect, and you can see things are failing at this point. So first, what we need to do is in our circle, create circle here, we're going to pass a few parameters. So the first one is going to be money count like this. It's going to be an int, just a normal variable. This is not going to work. So what I'm going to do, let's just for now comment all of that, and let's just call it here. Let's copy this money count. Okay, let's go ahead and say Alt Enter to remove the braces because we don't need those. Okay, so we're moving things around here. I'm just get rid of this. And now we have an issue because we need to pass an initial value. Let's just say 0 so that the preview still works. Okay, so nothing works yet, but at least we have something. Notice our clickable is not going to do anything, but at least we know we've hosted our state up here. Okay, but the next thing we need to do also here, right, we need to pass some sort of a callback. So I'm going to say updated or update counter. It's going to be a function. Remember, we can pass functions as parameters, which is really amazing. The idea here is that we'll need to pass something into this counter, this update money counter function. What is it that we're going to be passing? Well, we are going to pass an integer because it's going to be what we're going to be updating, using to update, in this case, the counter. And this will return nothing. So it's going to say unit as such. Let's go ahead and close this down so we have more space. Okay. Again, we have an issue here. For now, let's go ahead and comment this out. We don't need to show a preview of this. Okay. So there we go. So now this update counter will expect what? An int, which is going to be the actual counter. That means then, if we go back to where this has been called, that means we have to pass a few things. If you have over, it says no value passed for parameters update money counter. You can see here, expects money counter, right? But because we passed an integer, also a default value, it's not required. But update money, it is. So that means then I'm going to pass my counter. What do we call? Let's see, counter. Money counter is going to be set to what? Well, we're going to set to money counter we created at the top here. Say money counter. Now, so it so happens that I actually named them. It so happens that I name both the parameter name the same name as our variable here, our mutable state. That's okay. In this case, I'm just going to have to go and say dot value because I need to get the value. Because remember now, this is wrapped inside of a mutable state. So we need to get the value, the actual int. Okay. Now, if you hover over again, notice that we pass here this update money counter, which expects an integer. Also, because it's the last parameter, that is a function, right, inside of a function, that means we can actually treat this as a lambda, which means I can just go outside and say braces, curly braces like that, and voila. Now you can see we have this int, or it I should say, which is an integer, which is going to be the number that is being updated. So here then, what I need to do is to, of course, update this money counter variable, which is a mutable state. Right? Each time we click, we are going to receive that value. Right? So here I'm going to say money counter. I'm going to say that value is going to be equal to the int we are getting plus 1, like this. And now, because we understand that this money counter here, it's going to be updated as a mutable state, so it's listening to states, I can change this to something like money counter.value, like this, and see what happens. Let's go ahead and run. And there you have it. The moment it starts, it looks at the money counter. It knows that the default value in this mutable state is 0. If we put 10 here, this would show here. Okay. Now let's see moment of truth. If I tap, nothing is happening. What's going on? It looks like we haven't done anything in our clickable, right? We just comment things out and we still have this log. That's not what we want. What do we want to happen here? Well, here's the beauty. We have this callback here. That means then each time we click, we're going to say update, call this update money counter. And what we're going to do, we're going to pass inside here our money counter value, right? Because that's going to be the value that's been incremented there. That's an integer. So let's go ahead and run this one once again. So now if I tap, voila, you can see now it says 1 and keeps growing as such. And we still have this attached to tap. We can just remove that. That was for testing. Let's see, we run again. Okay, there we go. Now with tap, C1, and it's going to go and increment. There we go. And even to make it better, because we want to separate the concerns here, what I can do in our circle, we're passing, of course, my counter, which is going to be set to our money counter, which is immutable state. There is a state. Here, what I can do actually is as follow. I can actually change this because I want to change the naming. I can say, for instance, new value, right? And give it an arrow like this. So now what I can do, I can say our counter, money counter, that value is going to be set to our new value as such, which means then the updating or the increasing of the money will happen inside of our update counter. So I can say update counter +1 like this. So now we have set everything up the way it's supposed to be. And this var here looks like it's complaining. You can always say Alt or Option Enter. It's going to say change this to val, and we're going to do that. Okay, so there we go. So we've hosted the state to the calling the composable, because my app is calling, in this case, this create circle. And then what we're doing here is that for a circle, we change a few things. We passed the money counter argument, which is going to take care, or is going to track what's happening with our money counter there. Okay, get that value. And then because we have the lambda in our create circle, or we have a function that we call the update. Let's put this in a new line. This update money counter, and we're passing int. So we call that every time the button is clicked. We're going to call this update money counter. We're going to pass the money counter, whatever value we have here, and add 1 to that. That's exactly what's happening here. So it's going to look at money counter. It's going to be 0 at first. We're going to be passing that value into this, which in turn, we're going to set that value to the new value we're getting, which in this case, we are updating by 1. And now, my friends, we have created a very simple application. It does not a lot, but it really shows us this concept of state, which is very important, but also shows us how do we elevate that state to the calling composable. Now, why is it important to hoist the state? The reason why we want to hoist the state from our main composable to the calling composable functions need to be stateless, relatively stateless, which means they should not hold the state, right? Because we want them to be as flexible as possible. At this point, I can call this anywhere I want because it doesn't hold any state. We don't have this state here holding us up, right? So whenever I call, or whatever I call the create circle, I'll have to pass in the money counter and the update money counter function there. So we will delegate, we'll send the state to the parent composable, which will hold that state, and that will be changing itself there. And so the state is going to be changing, and then it's going to be propagated down to our circle, create circle, which then is going to go ahead and update the money. So there's a lot I threw at you here, and I did take my time to explain this because I want to make sure you really get this concept. Again, we will continue work with this, but I had to go slowly because I really want you to get this concept. Okay? And also remember, this is just the beginning of our journey here, so there will be a lot of opportunities for you to practice this. As it is, you can go ahead and practice this concept by creating, for instance, a counter, different counters and so forth, and see how this works. In fact, one of the things now you see that you can do, you can now, because we've hosted the state, right? It's here now. We can do all sort of things with that state. For instance, we can say money counter, that value is greater than 25. I want to show a text that says lots of money, like this, right? Because we have that state and it's easy for us to do such. In a previous example, we wouldn't be able to do that because the state was inside of our create circle. Now it's no longer there, so we can do all sort of things, right? So let's see. If I keep tapping, okay, getting there. Lots of money. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.